Scientists believe that if the world's carbon emissions aren't halved by 2030, the Earth may hit the point of no return. Today we'll be investigating climate change, what it is, why we care, and how to stop it.
I'm your host, Alex.
And I'm your co-host, Javier.
And this is for climate change. Did I make it?
Yeah.
Climate change is affecting all parts of the world differently. Because of this, we want to take a look at how it's affecting some different regions, starting with how it's affecting us here in the north.
However, after conducting some research, we realized how little publicly accessible information there is on the internet. So we decided to consult a professional.
Okay, so for our first question, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Michelle Boileau, and I'm the mayor of the city of Timmins.
How has climate change affected the north?
It's definitely had effects. I've often said that we're in a unique position here in our region because we could actually see the effects of climate change in our daily lives more than in some other areas of the world, right? And so we see examples of this in early breakups up the coast. When I'm thinking of ice breakup in the springtime, increased floodings and forcing people to have to evacuate their communities. And so that's becoming more and more prevalent due to climate change. It's also something that's talked about when we're talking about economic development. So often we talk about how agriculture should be the next sector that we should be focusing on because, the climate now is more conducive to agriculture and cultivating the lands. And so it's something that we could do now that perhaps we couldn't do before. We could do different types of agriculture now that we couldn't do before. And, often it's due to the fact that global warming, that the planet is warming and making it so that things are shifting northwards when it comes to agriculture. And so sometimes, we treat them as opportunities, but it's really important to continue to think of them as threats as well, because they are having not only an impact on the environment, our immediate environment around us, but it's having a social impact, right? People are being displaced because of this. So it's something that we have to keep in mind.
Our next question, we are wondering what Timmins' carbon footprints look like, so who their biggest emitters are.
Of course, we have a very important mining sector here, and we know that they're a big emitter. But quite honestly, within the city boundaries, because a lot of mining operations actually happen outside of the city boundaries, right? We only have one actual mine within our city boundaries, who are quite, corporately responsible. So they're doing a good job at reducing their emissions themselves. But when you look at within the city boundaries itself, one of the biggest emitters would be the corporation of the city of Timmins, with all the different plant facilities we have, right? We have wastewater treatment plants, all of our public works, the machinery that we're using to do things like snow removal and road repairs. And we're one of the largest employers, so understandably so, we'd be one of the largest emitters as well.
What measures have the city of Timmins put in place to help fight climate change?
So you'll notice, and this is available on our website, so I don't know if you had the chance to go take a look at our greenhouse gas emission reduction plan. But we back in 2017 or 2018, I believe, joined the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and their Partners for Climate Protection Initiative. And so we joined, I think it's something like 350 other municipalities across the country in a commitment to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And so part of that initiative was meeting a set of milestones. And the first one just essentially determining what our baseline is. What are our greenhouse gas emissions today, which was back in 2017, and then working through the milestones. It's, setting targets, making a plan, implementing the plan, and then measuring and monitoring. So we set our targets and our targets are to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, the community greenhouse gas emissions by 5%. From the 2017 baseline, and our corporate greenhouse gas emissions. And so anything that it's City of Timmins that's putting out, reducing that by 10%. So pretty ambitious targets to achieve just within 10 years, but we receive annual reports from our environment department on, how it's going, how the plan implementation is going, and what the measures are looking like. And we're on track to meet those targets by 2027. So.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So our last question for you today is, what can we do at home to help fight climate change?
Yeah, well, and that's an important question because, like I said, like in the city of Timmins, we have, the target to reduce our community-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 5%. That means that everybody has a small part to play to reduce those emissions and meeting that 5% target. And so it's things like utilizing public transportation when it's available, utilizing the municipal composting program, backyard composting program, just things like turning your lights off and turning your water off when you don't need it. Like I said, the city of Timmins is one of the biggest emitters, as like the corporation. If we didn't have to treat as much water through our wastewater treatment plant as we do, we would end up using less energy. So if everybody was just, reducing the amount of water that they're using in their daily lives, not only is that good for the amount of water that goes into the system, but then that reduces the amount of water that we have to treat as it comes out of our system, right? So there's a lot of small things that people could be doing. Shopping locally, right? Sourcing your foods and your goods and your products locally, to just try to reduce the footprint of, trying to get things to you. And we know that in Northern Ontario, that's not easy. And we have to bring things always a little bit further than if we're in Southern Ontario. So we have to be really mindful of like where our products are coming from. I know it's something that I do in my daily life when I'm doing my groceries and I'm looking at produce, and if something comes from Mexico, something comes from the States, and something comes from Canada, I'll opt for, the product that comes from Canada, even though it might not be what I initially went to the store for. I always try to, on the labels, they say product of, and so I try to keep things kind of no further than the States, but ideally within Canada and ideally within the region, right? Just knowing that the amount of carbon emission just to get that product to me is excessive when it doesn't need to be, right? So trying to, and supporting, those who are trying to make products available to us in our region. So that's something that not only as a municipality we could do, but every citizen can be doing. So I think just participating in the conversation is another thing, right? Making sure that we're talking about it. Things like what you're doing is important. Asking questions of, municipal leaders and your community leaders. Just making sure, because there are a lot of things going on. We have a lot of things to think about, a lot of things to be working on. So just by asking those questions of community leaders, it kind of just brings that back to top of mind. And actually, as I was reading through some of the stuff that we do and our plan, I noticed that there's a piece in our plan about just kind of being mindful of growth. And so we always talk about how we have to grow the city and build more housing, and but not once in all of those conversations I've been having over the past few months about, building more housing and things like that, have we thought about, okay, but, how will we try to reduce the emissions that are going to come out of these houses? Are we going to put in sort of zero emission policies, or, it's something that hasn't been thought about when we're thinking about housing development. And so I'm glad you asked the question, because now, allowed me to kind of read through the documentation. I'll be bringing that back to our housing task force now and be like, oh, wait a second, have we thought about, climate protection and all of this as well? So small things like that, one day at a time and one small act at a time can make a big difference.
After talking to Mayor Michelle Boileau and gathering some important information on how climate change is affecting us here in the north, we decided to take a look at how it's affecting some different regions of the world.
We decided to start by consulting a marine biologist to see how climate change is affecting our oceans and coastal regions.
Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Aiden McGee, and I'm a marine biologist for NASA, and I do research on how climate change is affecting aquatic life.
Is climate change having a significant effect on our aquatic life?
Yes, aquatic ecosystems are very sensitive to temperature change, so even a slight change of 1.5 degrees could kill off close to 70 to 90% of coral reefs, and a change of 2% could kill off close to 99% of coral reefs all around the planet.
What about fish and other species?
Climate change is causing water temperatures to rise. This will cause many different species to migrate north into colder waters and potentially create many invasive species and also topple the balance of many ecosystems.
How are melting glaciers affecting these aquatic ecosystems?
The glaciers melting will add a significant amount of fresh water into the seawater, which will cause many ocean currents to slow down that transport heat to the tropics and around the world. This will cause temperatures to change from even 5 to 10 degrees Celsius all around the world, which will push us past our breaking point.
And finally, How is climate change going to affect coastal regions?
Global warming causes sea levels to rise and coastal storms to intensify, and evidently will cause more frequent and severe flooding.
The marine biologist gave us some really useful information that we don't really consider as people who live far from the coast.
So now we've heard about how climate change is going to affect some different regions of the world individually, like the north and coastal regions, but we're still left wondering how it's going to affect the world as a whole.
So we decided to contact the leading environmental scientist who works at the World Health Organization.
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Grant Stack, and I'm a leading environmental scientist at the World Health Organization.
As global warming keeps going, climate keeps getting worse. At what point will this become irreversible?
If global temperatures rise by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, some environmental changes can become irreversible depending on how long it stays beyond this threshold.
Could you explain to me more what this threshold is?
If the temperatures were to rise by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, then climate change would speed up on its own faster than we could fix it. This would render the damage done irreversible. To avoid this, we will need to reach net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050 or sooner. Net zero means that all emissions released by human activities are counterbalanced by taking carbon out of the atmosphere.
So how do we reach net zero carbon emissions?
There's many steps we will need to take. Some of these include moving towards more renewable energy sources, cutting down on large mining operations, and stopping overconsumption.
Now we've heard the facts on what climate change is and how it'll affect the world around us, but there's still one really important question we have yet to answer. Why do we care?
I have a young daughter who's 3, and I want to make sure that she has, a good environment to grow up in and to live in. So part of it is just ensuring, a good future for her and for the next generation.
I care because I want to make snowmen with my grandbabies.
Animals such as the polar bear are losing their habitats at an alarming rate.
With the temperature increasing, there are fire bans, and I can't make memories with my children by having campfires in the summer.
We're getting a lot of flooding in a lot of places, mudslides, landslides, things like that are happening that are destroying people's homes and killing people. And then forest fires. I mean, that's pretty, you can see what's happening right now in Nova Scotia and in Alberta. What often happens is about every year in BC and California too. So pretty important that we start to, I will never really control it, but start reining in our contribution to making it worse.
I'm your host, Alex.
And I'm your co-host, Javier.
And this is for Climate Change.